We're back with another episode of Semi-Pro. Today, my guest is Adam Fitch, a journalist who's been focused on the business side of esports for the past few years. Fair to say, I think. And he's recently been brought on by Dexerto as head of business content. Before that, he worked with Esports Insider as a content creator, as one of the faces of the brand, we could say. Given that this has been your focus for, like I said, a couple of years now, or a good while now, as far as business content goes, and it's clearly still quite important to you because of the job that you've recently accepted, I think we should start the interview really by talking about what motivates you to explore the business side of esports as a broad topic, but also like what stands out about it. Is it partially the fact that maybe there's not that many content creators in the space talking about it, or is there something more interesting about it than just the fact that it's like an open season in that respect?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I fell into it. I really fell into it. When I tried to get into esports, I just Googled esports news. Esports Insider came up. I applied, and then I realized really, it was like business focused content, right? So it wasn't something I was particularly interested in beforehand. I'd not really read any business articles, whether in sports or tech or anything like that. And then I just found it really interesting because, look, like none of this stuff exists without the business side of the industry, right? But yet it's still super underdeveloped and undercovered, and there's still a lot of smoke and mirrors. And I think that that's what drives me today still, right? Is the fact that I've been tweeting about this stuff recently, but we don't really know many of the details. Like, look, if Fnatic partners with a company, how long is it for? What are the financial details? What does it really involve? Instead of just saying social activations, what does that mean? Why are they looking to partner with Fnatic? Why have they chosen Fnatic in particular? What markets are they going for? There's all these different angles, and none of them are being explored, right? And I feel now I've got like 2.5 years under my belt and kind of established myself, and I'll be at the biggest publication, so there's a bit more leverage there, I hope. I can start to bring some of that information to light, and that will really actually help us to gauge the health of the industry, the prosperity of the industry, and how it develops over time. Because like journalists kind of write the first draft of history, right? It's like, especially when you're breaking news. So we need people on the business side, and Jacob Wolf does it occasionally where he can, but he's certainly not focused there. There's Kevin Hitt over at Observer, but he's kind of been out of action for a bit because I think there's been a bit of back and forth as to whether he'll be doing investigative stuff or more general reporting. So I felt it was time for me to kind of get over my quote unquote imposter syndrome, just go for it and see where I can get to. So it's just a case of like, esports doesn't tick as a professional industry without the business side. And with that in mind, I want everyone to know what the hell's going on. And especially I want to know what the hell's going on as well. And then I can just share that with everyone else.
Well, you said earlier that esports doesn't tick as a professional industry without the business side. Some would say that esports is not really professional even with the business side factored in, with, a sort of an evaluation as to how they handle the business activations and all that stuff. In a way, I feel like as a layman really myself, although I am interested in it as it pertains to the ramifications of the industry, where things go, what is this sort of like, almost you're doing like sign reading or something, and you're trying to figure out where things are going based on some deals. Without the transparency, without the information that you're talking about, the length of contracts or deals or sponsorships, the money that's changing hands, it doesn't really seem like the average fan, at least from my experience, from my perspective, can really get into the nitty gritty and look at that. Is this something where esports as a industry simply has to mature in order to get to that point? Are people going more into that direction when it comes to this business side? Are they more interested in releasing this information? Or is this something you think you're going to have to sort of fight tooth and nail for it in order to get the information out there that would be interesting to people, that would help them invest themselves into the news a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, like, people don't know what they're missing out on until they're shown what's going on, right? And there's not really been anyone who's attempted to take the business stories and translate it into a language that really affects the fans, right? So obviously a big deal for TSM is a win for the organization. And if you're a fan of the organization, you should care. But no one really cares that you partner with Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew, whoever it may be, So there's an aspect there. If we can make the fans really care about the business side, then the people who are in the business will actually be more inclined, in my opinion at least, to share these stories, right? If there's no demand at the moment, then they've got no reason to. There's nothing telling them, look, we should maybe say this is a 3-year deal and it's worth $500K a year, and we're also getting product supply. Like, there's no reason for that at the moment. It's kind of like the contract situation in CSGO. Like, now it takes somebody to actually kickstart things for everyone else to kind of go, okay, we need to get on this as well, and then from there we can actually see the state of the scene and how good it is, right? So like Dignitas making plenty of deals at the moment, and there's more to be announced, I believe, but. And they're quite open, but only in the context that we're aware of at the moment. But if I can work with Dignitas, just a random example, and say, look, how long is this for? Let me speak to the partner and find out exactly why they're partnered with yourself, and get that in a way where it's like, look, Dignitas fans and esports fans, this is why this deal's important. This is why it matters. Like at that point, they'll hopefully want more of it, and that will start to become the standard over time if I do my job correctly, right? There's no pressure there. And over time we can start making the fans care, and then that means more eyeballs on the stories, which means more eyeballs and more care and more emphasis on the partnerships, which then benefits the organizations or the tournament organizers or the leagues and their partners as well. So it actually benefits everybody. It's a rising tide situation, but nobody's really thinking of it that way yet. And it's taken me 2.5 years to get to this point to really have like the haha moment, the eureka moment where I'm like, oh shit, we've been doing this wrong. Let's change things, and that's coincided with my upcoming job. So I think we can change things, and I think it'll benefit every player in the industry, especially myself as well. That helps, but and Dexerto, of course, because increased viewership, but it will actually help everyone else, and it's my job to help them realize that, I think.
To corroborate what you're saying about, esports orgs having big deals that are presumably very impactful to the business side, but fans simply not being aware of them or perhaps not caring when there is the token announcement. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Astralis Group going public. This is a story that about last year sometime, no more vague than that, of course. They went public and they became publicly traded. Really, as far as I can tell, there's been no follow-up to this. Some people had some takes initially. Should esports orgs even be publicly traded? That became a bit of a discussion. But especially with, in light of social media shortening everybody's attention spans, it would seem, there doesn't really seem to have been any follow-up to it, any pressing for more information, even in a situation like that where you need to wait some weeks, maybe even some months in order to figure out where things are going and how well it's doing. It doesn't seem like I've seen anybody even put a throwaway Reddit post up or a throwaway tweet that says, I've just checked the stocks and this is what they look like, and here's what we can infer from that information. Nobody with the know-how or with the wherewithal to do anything like that has made it to the front page for a long amount of time, right? It's not really been big news, even though when it first came out, it was potentially industry shaping news with regards to setting an example for other esports orgs. So specifically when it comes to the Astralis Group in particular, but also extrapolating it out to wrap around everything in the scene where you have these big brand deals or these big news on the business side, and there's an initial announcement but nothing really following up with that. What's your take on how the orgs themselves would be able to continue to sort of mine clicks and attention and significance from the kind of announcements that we're talking about, where these deals are potentially industry shaping in that way?
Yeah, and you think if it is such like a groundbreaking move, then they want to be like singing about it. They want to be shouting it from the hilltops, right? And I don't know why that is. I think it may be because there is a lack of interest in the business side. So like, why are we going to get into this stuff? And also, business is pretty bad in esports as it is. It's not in a great state overall. People say it's esports is one of the upcoming industries. It's the next big thing or whatever. But like profitability is it's a pipe dream, right? That's it. And I mean, if you look like ESL and MTG and DreamHack, they're not doing great. The Huya deal, where they were going to form like a joint venture with ESL and I think invest in and obtain like 15% of ESL, that fell through, and then COVID happened. Like that's something really significant there as well, and no one's really spoken about it. I think like Richard Lewis will touch on it occasionally, but it's not like business is his beat particularly, so it's not like that's what he's staying on top of. And I think partially there's a lack of people focusing on it, so it's never really the follow-ups. I don't want to throw any of my writers at Esports Insider under the bus, but they're not massively the investigative types. They're more, okay, let's see what's going on at the moment instead of let's check on what's happened in the past and how it's evolved. And in like Astralis's case, I mean, that realistically it changes how they have to operate. They have to be so much more transparent with everything they do, and that's been both beneficial and detrimental to them. I think probably more detrimental than beneficial so far, but having that level of transparency, of course, is actually a good thing for fans to connect. I mean, if you're doing a bunch of fuckery, which maybe Astralis Group are right now, I mean, I tend to think they're not quite as evil as some people will make out. But if you're doing a bunch of fuckery, then the fans are not going to connect. But like if you're very open about your struggles and you keep things legit and you're not using players as kind of puppets and getting them to be the mouthpieces for stuff, then yeah, that would be massively beneficial for them, realistically. And I mean, it's just so new, the whole going public thing. It's so new that no one really knows best how to navigate it, right? And no one's really been particularly successful yet because it's barely a thing. If you look at like Simplicity Esports, they wanted to go on the NYSE, and Guilds just had a successful IPO on the London Stock Exchange, but that's about it at this point. So it's kind of uncharted territory. Everyone is seemingly behind the scenes just watching, seeing what the hell is going to happen. And it's a tricky one. I feel there's a lot more that could be capitalized on in terms of like the attention side of things, but also, as you say, like the attention span of people on social media is lackluster, to say the least, right? So putting a lot of effort into sharing and being as transparent as you can be when it could just be forgotten in 3 minutes, I don't know if that's an attractive prospect.
Well, there's another recent example of this kind of phenomenon where obviously, I think this was back in like 2017 or 2018, but some years ago, the Optic deal with Infinite had fallen through, and it became obvious that, Hector was trying to make a power play to get the whole brand back. And only recently, I would say very recently, has there been even more information on this. But between the two sort of events in history, I have seen pretty much zero coverage about the whole ordeal. And that's something where it affects multiple teams in multiple games. In theory, the sort of, if you can just imagine the butterfly effect of one change on the organizational level, the administrative level for that org, it could potentially impact a lot of different esports, a lot of different companies down the line. So is this a situation that's just like another example of the Astralis Group, almost being silent on that? Or is there more to the story there that's a little bit different as far as the Hector and Optic moves?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't feel obliged to discuss what's not been announced yet. And I mean, I actually think things were reported on prematurely. I will say that much. But so when the Optic / Infinite and Immortals deal was going on, it was me and Jacob Wolf reporting on it. And I grew up as an Optic fan, right, since being like 13. So I'm not a fan now by any means, but I just naturally kind of kept an eye on it. So I think I've probably been the most vocal person and actually understand the whole Infinite situation better than most people. I know quite a lot of the people who worked at Infinite. So everything was blown out of proportion there anyway, where it turned into a massive war against between like Optic and Infinite when it was only a few people within it that were actually, it's such a strange thing, right? But it did turn into the fans being on the side of Optic, and then anything Infinite did or any of the employees that were not quote unquote part of Optic, they were seen as villains. And that was a very weird situation. And it could have taken, it could have taken a very different route if they were transparent about things again. But instead it was like Hitch would get drunk and do an around the bar video and then speak about it. And I'm like, that's probably not the best kind of PR you can get. It's not the best way to communicate with the fans. So the Optic situation is a very weird one. The narrative there is very much a unicorn in esports, of course, like the biggest brand gets bought out, when in fact Infinite was actually looking to get Evil Geniuses before Optic Gaming. That's a little nugget for you. So Evil Geniuses, that's been a fucked up situation as well, in fact, and there's stuff going on there that I think is a lot more fishy than people have ever spoken about publicly. I've got some mad conspiracy theories there, but yeah, the Optic situation, it's a canary in a coal mine thing, and there's not many people who know the entire situation, and thankfully we haven't got too many people speaking on it as if they know everything when they don't. And it's a situation where not many people know what's going on, so you can compromise your sources very quickly if you don't do things the right way when reporting on this stuff, and it's changing very quickly as well. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, so it's a danger to from a journalistic point of view to really be reporting on it. And then you can't actually announce anything on like the Optic side or the Energy or Hex side at the moment. because there's a lot of moving parts. So it's a really awkward situation. And as I say, I think the report came out prematurely, and then people just take what they want from it anyway. So they were saying like, it's a done deal, it's happened, Hex owns it again now. It's like, no, he's in the process of trying to, but he has to go through the CDL and then to figure out what he's going to do with the sport. And it's a very weird situation. And I actually prefer people not talking about stuff if they don't know it, rather than chucking misinformation out there. So depending on the kind of problem or the kind of topic we're discussing, I think a different approach is needed, in fact.
Well, not chucking misinformation out there, only speaking when you know what you're talking about. That's something that is very foreign to a lot of people who chime in on this stuff, especially on social media. So I did want to highlight what you were talking about with the journalism and as far as the journalist's role in protecting the source, because this is obviously something that even back in the Infinite deal, from memory, there was, I'm blanking on the journalist's name, but there was a journalist who published a very widespread piece that only really had one source. And Amanda, yes. So at some point you were brought on the Richard Lewis's stream to discuss this. I vaguely recall it being like ridiculously late where you were at the time. So there's probably something where it was like spur of the moment. He's like, "Hey, come on Discord," and you're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
So
exactly that.
Yeah.
I put out my report, and then Amanda put out a report that was full of false information. And I was in the Optic Reddit or Discord, and I said the report was bullshit. And then Richard turned on his stream, and I heard he was talking about it. I just finished working for the day. It was 1:30. I just gotten into bed, got on my phone, turned his stream on, and then everyone was like, "Oh, Adam's here, blah, 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 get him on." And then he was like, "Hey, Adam, if you want, you can come discuss this." And it ended up just being a complete takedown of the report. And I'm like, oh, this is not how I plan to do things at all. But yeah, that was like my first real big story as well. It was a very, very weird situation, but I'm impressed by the level of detail you've remembered there, in fact.
Well, watching it back somewhat recently probably helps with that.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah, I'll pull the curtain back a little bit. But yeah, so when it comes to that particular like event, we'll say, is one of the things that struck me was the fact that it is only one source and there's a lot of information outlined in there would potentially, like, if this source was not somebody who is like presenting the information in bad faith, right? Because there was the whole discussion of sources sometimes lie and they plant information that they will be advantageous to them. So assuming the source was actually truthful, but they were willing to go on the record anonymously, well, I guess so, off the record in theory, but they were willing to provide for the story in an environment where they're providing so much information, and it's just one anonymous source. There's a lot that would allow anybody who is vindictive or not very happy with that report coming out to link back to that particular individual. So that's probably another reason why you would want to make sure you don't have just one source, because as soon as there's more than one, it becomes a crapshoot of figuring out who might have leaked what information. It's a lot harder to track. In the same way, I would say that must also be one of the limitations of a journalist's ability to actually provide the information that would be interesting to the viewers, whereas another reason why we need transparency, or we would benefit from having the orgs themselves being the ones who are behind these announcements, maybe partnering with journalists, as has happened sometimes in the past, to announce player moves or sponsorship deals or something like that, in a way similar to what I imagine your role at Dexerto will be in the coming months. So the question then is, what kind of steps would you be able to take as a journalist? Like, where are you most limited when it comes to actually providing the content, and what would be the most helpful role that an organization could play in presenting some sort of information publicly in a way that will catch the imagination of viewers, and in a way that will provide content that will be engaging for fans and allow them to really connect a little bit deeper with the teams themselves?
Yeah, I tell you what, if I was the kind of person who would operate on one source, I'd have 300 stories out right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like 300 big scoops, like industry shaking scoops right now, because just the things you hear. But like, yeah, look, I think organizations, what I'm hoping for and what I'll be pushing for is, as I say, like I know we'll never get like financial details unless I get that behind the scenes, right? If I do a bit of digging and have decent connections in the right spots, right? But then they probably stand to lose more than to gain from doing that,
right?
Which feeds back into what you're saying. I think, look, like just honesty is the main thing. If you can't comment on something, then say you can't comment. But if there's no reason for you not to say something, then stop. Like, yeah, I know you're gonna try and control the narrative, but like, I won't let you do that. So we meet in the middle and say, look, have a chat with me. And if you can't answer a question, then tell me. I'll include that in the interview, and I'll say, look, they refuse to comment on this bit. But like, what I don't see what there is to lose if you're doing all these great deals as you say you are. Discussing them. If you've signed like Team Liquid, for example, have renewed with Marvel, but there's been no public announcement about that. Why would that be? That makes me think, okay, what the hell is going on there? Maybe it's something that they should be proud of that, because Marvel getting in the industry is a big deal. And then renewing with Marvel, a celebrated partnership, by the way, like people love the jerseys and the apparel. Why would you not be announcing that? Are you waiting for the right time? Why do you need to wait for a time if it's been renewed? Okay, you're trying to control some sort of narrative here. Okay, why would you need to control the narrative? There's no need. Like, that's a really good story. So, like, for me, I don't understand it. Speak to me about it. Or go to Richard, go to whoever it may be, go to ESI or the Observer. Like, I don't understand why you need to be waiting and have these planned PR pushes. Because if your deal's big, if Team Liquid renews with Marvel, whether you give it to Observer and Insider at the same time, if one covers it, the other is going to afterwards. Because that is a big deal, and our job is to keep people abreast of what's happening in the industry. So I don't get what there is stopping people from really working with us. I mean, look, there are some people out there who would like to capitalize on things and misconstrue things and label them in a way that makes them seem worse than what they are, or maybe what you could call as clickbait. Dexerto gets accused of that quite a lot. I disagree on most cases. FYI, I'm not that guy. None of my work you can ever say is clickbait. So surely you can trust me. And if you don't trust me, then you're not aware of how I operate, right? So let's form a line of communication and have a chat and see what's what. Because PR agencies, I've excluding the last month, I've probably had calls with 5 people across different PR agencies, so they can say, look, what kind of stories are you interested in covering? What PRs do we need to send you? Can we work on exclusive interviews? What kind of things would you like? That rarely ever happens. And I don't know if that's a me thing. I don't know if I need to be going out there because they need me more than I need them realistically, or what. But there's a whole lack of collaboration there. And I think it's because if you send something to me or Jacob, like, we'll see through the bullshit and we will ask questions, but I'm not just going to put out whatever the hell you tell me to put out. Like the whole Guild Esports, the initial launch of the IPO was given to exclusive, I think, to BBC. Like, BBC don't know esports; they're not going to scrutinize it the way someone who really knows the industry would. So that's an instance of them tactically controlling the narrative. And in other aspects, I think it's just a lack of communication, which probably boils down to laziness, to be honest with you. And also in esports, you have to wear like 79 different hats just for one like full-time job. So how are you going to find time to speak to little old me if you've got to do 79 different things? You know, it's I don't know. Part of me thinks it's just esports is just a lot smaller than what people think still, and it'll just take time to get to a point where we're operating properly.
Well, I think one of the things that you had mentioned when discussing ESI specifically was that there was a very small number of employees, and as far as associated with that particular job or that particular organization. So when if you asked me before finding that particular information out, I would have just assumed that there was maybe tens, hundreds, right? And the disconnect between that is mostly a fact of, as a fan myself, I'm mostly just watching the games, and occasionally I'm reading into some business information or some third party information, some reports from journalists. But a lot of the time, I'm not necessarily paying attention to who staffs them. So I think probably the same thing happens with if you put out a good enough front and you as a team organization or as any sort of organization that's competing on the market and not necessarily related to journalism itself, if you're doing a decent enough job presenting yourself as that, you almost get like a lot of free. Suddenly, people will just assume that you have a lot more competence or a lot more time in the space or a lot more backing than maybe you actually do. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why they don't necessarily want to share all the details of any deals that they have, because maybe the full details would disclose just how more closer to human they actually are, right? You bring them back down a little bit.
Yeah, it's like pulling the curtain down. That is, you know what I mean? It's like, look, this is actually what's happening. There's no veil here now. Like for example, at ESI, I'm the only full-time editorial staff. Like, the writers are freelance. They've got no particular loyalty. They're loyal to their bank accounts and paying the bills, right? As a freelance journalist in esports, it's not particularly easy unless you're one of maybe 5 people.
Right.
I think there are many factors to that, and a lot of it is many people just aren't that great. But to be honest with you, but yeah, I was the only full-time editorial staff, and I still am until October 16th, I guess. But so yeah, like as you say, unless you know that, like it seems like we're competent. It seems like everything's completely fine, and there's not a lot of super late nights and a lot of stressing and a lot of me filling in gaps where I shouldn't really need to fill in the gaps. And I think that that's rife across esports as a whole. You've got like evil geniuses hiring like 80 people in like a year. Going from what was described as a distressed business or a dying business to like, yeah, we've got 80 people and we're building is it in Seattle? I think they're building a facility in Seattle, and they've got something in LA. Like just outrageous stuff, and like they're loud and proud about that. Of course they are, but the people who got a humble operation going on, it's actually better not to shift the perception sometimes, and that's just another way of controlling some sort of narrative. Like, but yeah, you may judge, like for example, ESI differently if you know there's one person like really full time dedicated to this stuff than if you think there are 10.
Of course,
I think that's translatable across all of business, really.
Well, like you're saying, if evil geniuses were loud and proud about something as relatively benign in other industries as hiring 80 people and building two facilities, if they're as boisterous about that, it's kind of the subtext is not everybody else is in a position to do this, has done this, is interested in doing this, which tells us maybe that esports isn't all it's cracked up to be on that particular side, right? I wanted to ask actually a little bit more of a probing question about how these organizations engage with their viewers, but also, of course, how they engage with journalists. We've seen a ton of examples of mostly in the player moves situation, some person who may not actually be a PR agent or a social media manager. Somebody will be on the account and they'll say, this is wrong. We completely, deny everything that's in this report. And, we've seen that 100 times in esports, right? And almost every single time it's to a journalist who's already published a bunch of true reports like DK or sometimes even Richard Lewis or something like that. And you'll get people who deny these reports, but they're denying reports that are almost always proven correct, or at the time of reporting, it was a true talk that was potentially being considered, and that comes out, years down the line or something. So the situation then arises that it's almost like in my opinion, anyway, it seems almost like a vicious cycle where you have the journalists who are perceived by these organizations as some sort of either they're like something that is malfeasant, that they're trying to take us down and exploit every avenue they can to get a good story, and which is like they don't think about it, they don't put two and two together. But if they do that to every single org and every single org suffers immensely for that, eventually there will be no more stories. So it's probably not going to not really the case, because it would be very short-sighted. But they perceive that either that is the case, or they see journalists as, like you said earlier, almost like mouthpieces in a way, where like, oh, we can just feed him this information and he'll publish it, right? And then they get surprised when there's more questions asked, or they decline the story based on that. So because there's this sort of adversarial relationship between journalists and the business side of things, the question then becomes like, at what point do you really mend the fences? At what point do you hope for a better communication? Is it just that, better people need to be cycled into the positions? Because of course we forget that these aren't just monoliths. There's people staffing them, and sometimes they come and go. Is it a position where you would have to wait for a new PR agent to represent them, or a new set of people to be a little bit more open-minded to this sort of thing? Or is there a way we can short circuit that to speed that process up of bridging the gap between these two parties and having them be a little bit more a little bit more symbiotic, we'll say?
Yeah, well, I'd say, fortunately, more and more organizations are hiring like head of comms and comms people, in-house people now who are dedicated to that and really know the org. Where if you're working with an agency, the chances that they're giving you 100% of their time are slim to none, right? Because they will not live off just of your account. So it's a really positive thing that comms people are being hired now in-house. So that should, in theory, help things chug along in the future once they get to know the industry. Because if they've got prior experience, then esports is kind of a baffling arena to enter. I'd posit at least. And the thing is, I think it's both ends. I mean, I could wait forever for people to reach out to me, but most of my job is forging connections anyway, right? And trying to find things out. So I can at least say to someone, I could go to, I don't know, think of a good example, FaZe Clan, right? Plenty of stuff going on at FaZe Clan, not just in esports, but if I go to them and say, look, I'd really love to work with you going forward. Can you send me your press releases and the embargoes, and we'll cover your developments? But also, I really want to interview the people involved in these deals before it goes out. And if they say no because you reported something bad about us before, I'd say, look, if you don't do fuck shit, then we can't report on fuck shit. Like, it's not our fault that you fuck up. Like, just if we hold you accountable, like we're actually helping you out, because then you realize, oh shit, maybe we're doing something wrong here. Okay, maybe we need to book up our ideas. Like, we're not necessarily out to get anyone. We just, like, a lot of journalism, like, there can be really positive journalism, but a lot of it tends to focus on the negative stuff, right? Like, look, let's tell the bad stories, because the good ones always get out almost always anyway. So I think there's a lack of self-awareness there. It's like, look, the only reason we report on the bad stuff you're doing is because you're doing the bad stuff. That doesn't make us the bad guys. That makes you the bad guys. And once you get that level of understanding, look, if I reach out to Chelsea Northern, who's the head of comms or maybe director of comms, whatever the role may be, but in charge of comms at FaZe Clan, and we understand that, we establish that baseline. Look, I'm happy to kind of work with you, not as a kind of ambassador or mouthpiece, but like, look, like, we can work together and you can get your stories out there, we can get the truth out there, symbiotic thing, that's great. But also, if you fuck up and I hear about it, I'm also going to put that out. Like, if we can reach an understanding there, then it's up to them how they approach it. But they at least know where I stand and where we stand as journalists, right? I don't know, man. I just think there's a lack of communication, a complete breakdown, and I can do more. So in my new role, I'm going to be more proactive in reaching out to people and saying, look, I'm not interested in being an ambassador. I'm interested in telling the truth and getting more information out there to people. Would you like to help with that? Here's why it'll benefit you. And then if they don't want the benefits out of it, then that raises suspicions, right? And then I look further, just unofficially, not through their comms people.
Well, of course, the caveat there has to be made that, you know, when they're assuming that you're out to get them because you keep reporting on the bad stories, they're missing out on the obvious subtext of, if we stop, you know, providing examples of bad stories, those stories won't be there because we'll stop.
Exactly.
We've stopped doing the bad stuff. So
it can be a big happy family.
Exactly. It makes sense. So the next sort of section of this interview, I wanted to talk a little bit about rebranding, which is not necessarily exclusively focused on business deals themselves. It's more internal to the orgs. But we've seen some examples of rebranding, high profile side of things. Obviously, some years ago, it was the LEC that rebranded from the European LCS over in the League of Legends side. That was a big deal. At first, I think there was some skepticism, like, why would you even change the name after so long? But seems to have stuck at this point. We also had NRG rebrand, which they didn't change they changed the logo and the art, but they didn't change their name in the same way that LEC did. That was just seen as confusing for most people. One of the things that I think it contrasts well between these two cases that I've used as examples is that the LEC had a reason for it, and they were transparent, relatively speaking, about why they were rebranding. They even had some content made as far as like interviews and podcasts go. There were people like Riot Quickshot who went on a couple of episodes of some talk shows, and he talked about the fact that, hey, this is some of the process that we used, and we went through all of these people, and sort of was transparent about the process, and that helped shed some light on how big a deal it actually was for these people, where you got a sense that there's a reason why they were rebranding, and they felt strongly about it. Whereas I don't remember anything even remotely close to that for NRG. Obviously, when Evil Geniuses rebranded and got rid of the sigil and went for that just plain text logo, that was another thing that was somewhat similar to NRG, where people were like really confused, but it was probably even worse in most fans' minds in that respect, because it's a very loved and historic brand. So only after the fact for some of these brands, if we ever get any information on the rebranding itself, only after the fact do we get any context. We don't get anything leading up to it. There's not really much of an announcement. The announcement is we've changed our logos and our apparel, and now there's some more merch for you to buy, and so on. And there's very little in the way of context. There's very little in the way of here's what we were thinking and here's why we settled on this, and maybe some of the process. This to me seems like ripe for, you could get some cameras in the room when people are talking about potential logos and drawing stuff up. Presumably that's not going to be confidential information. You could just make some YouTube videos out of that stuff, or at the very least you could like put some highlight reels on Twitter or something and add a little bit more context to, show fans that this was a serious process, right? And just by virtue of doing that, you'll engender a little bit more respect, I think, from those people. So what's your take generally on rebranding as a whole, and how most orgs have done it, as far as some of the more disastrous examples we've seen, but also some of the more positive ones?
Yeah, you nailed it, I think, early on in there, saying like you have to do it for a reason. If you're just changing things to go, oh, we could do with a refresh, like come on, like you've got to think if you're a legacy brand or you've been around a few years, there's the familiarity. There's people who own your merchandise. I don't know if it values or devalues like the old merchandise. It depends on, I guess, the trajectory of the organization from henceforth. But yeah, I think there has to be a purpose to it, right? And I mean, I'm not a designer. I'm not a super creative guy overall. I'd suggest so, but I do have designer friends, and I'm now like fairly acquainted with the guy who's in charge of fixing Evil Genius's branding, and he's very vocal on the jobs that have been done elsewhere in rebranding since. So it's actually been handy to see what he thinks. Look, and you know, like Hellraisers, they changed theirs to seemingly like some red eyebrows, and
Yeah.
that is just like, what the fuck does this mean? What is the point?
I
That
thought
one
about bringing them
stands
up,
out.
but that was
Yeah.
like they're such an obscure brand now. Nobody really knows about them. They are an example of like one of the worst rebrands I've ever seen. It's really
but then you
embarrassing.
look at Gambit Esports, so you know, same region, probably same kind of. Gambit's got a bit more kind of legacy and pedigree to it, I guess. But I
Right.
mean, not a soup like then. It's not like night and day between them. The agency they work with put out a page that broke everything down and said, look, this is how we're retaining the legacy. That you could tell they were very thoughtful about. Look, we don't want to alienate the old fans, but we want to make sure that this brand is squeaky clean going forward. Like United just did a little change where it just basically tweaked the logo. Because it was poorly designed before, basically, where there was like incorrect spacing and random bits and bobs that shouldn't be there. And they put out like a thread explaining why they've made these changes, what these changes are. But like, we're still the same organization, we've still got the same values. We just felt like it was time to make sure we were on top of our game and as squeaky clean as we can be. So in that case, it's like, okay, yeah, you're trying to be more professional and make sure you've got a brand that you don't look at and like notice the inherent flaws, like, you know what I mean? But like Evil Geniuses, yeah, that was the thing is that's a strange one. I know under the leadership of Nicola Point Jameson, she's very adamant. Again, I'm not going to get into all my conspiracy theories here, but she's, to me, very adamant in making sure she's a face of the brand and that people know that she is leading it now and that this is not the Evil Geniuses you once knew. This is a completely different thing. And with that came like the new slogan and the new logo and the new approach to things. They've got like a diversity, inclusivity based podcast and such forth, right? I think it's called something to do with Live Proud or something like that. Maybe like a play on evil backwards being live or something. I don't know. I haven't really paid too much attention to it, to be completely honest. But nonetheless, like she that was a real rebrand where it's like everything you thought you knew about Evil Geniuses, throw that the fuck out the window. And we should have known that when they did get rid of the legacy iconic logo, like, which in fact, if you speak to most people who are big on design and branding, would say it's a pretty fucking good logo. Out of all the ones that's been rebranded, that's probably the one that needed it the least, right? But that was meant to signal the start of something new, like, look, we're starting afresh. So that makes sense to rebrand it in that sense if you need to. I still don't think what they ended up with is really that much more impactful or attractive than the old branding. But obviously they had to pivot back. So yeah, it's a strange one. I think it's a case by case basis. Like Astralis just changed some things where they dropped a couple of brands and updated their social graphics and their approach to things. And one thing I've noticed with all these rebrands, they're launching new websites and calling them like a universe. Like, this is like the Astralis universe. Welcome to the new universe of Gambit or whatever it may be. And it's just it's a website. It's like, but it's maybe signaling that they want to make sure that they capture more of the attention. So not only during games and stuff, but you want to go to their website and be immersed in everything that's going on there. But I mean, it's not updated enough for that to be the case anyway, to be honest with you. So that's a misstep, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not pushed either. Like, the first I've actually heard about it, to be honest. So
there you go.
I don't even know about it.
It's something I've noticed a lot where it's like, we're launching this universe, like a brand new language and a brand new way of communicating with you visually. You know what I mean? All the pretentious shit. But realistically, you've changed your logo. Like, why have you done it? Tell us that, so we can try and understand it. Otherwise, you're going to alienate us. That's what I think it boils down to. If you feel forced to do it, and I do like the Gambit one's a really good example of what. Look, we've kept the star, but we've done this, we've done that, and here's why. We've changed the colors to make it to pop a bit more, but it's still a red that you'll recognize to, like, herald back to how it was. That's spot on to me, and I can understand the reasoning once it's told. Like, I'm not a creative, I'm not a designer, so like, we need to know what the hell you've done this for. So I agree. I think some are useless, some are pointless, and there's an organization, pretty prominent organization, that will announce a rebrand in the next 2 months that will make you think, you've only just fucking done it. Why are you doing it again? And also, why have you changed it to this? So keep an eye out for that. I can't say who it is just yet, but kind of prominent. It's in a big league. I'll put it that way. I don't understand it all the time, but that is also meant to signal a new era because leadership changes and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like it's almost egotistical on the behalf of the leaders. Look, we're taking over this now. It's going to be a brand new thing. We need to make sure people know. That's how it seems to me. We don't want to be associated with what was before us.
Well, in some cases, what was before us, sometimes, like, especially with EG's sake, while they started off strong with CSGO, you can say that, they had their dips, and I'm sure the onslaught of social media backlash on the rebrand itself probably didn't catch the players too well and probably was a little distracting, if I had to guess. But I mean, just the fact that it's such a legacy brand, like you say, is something that you got to consider when you're making changes. And if you go too far, the way that they seem to have done in the eyes of most fans, it's going to come back to bite you.
Imagine if Optic Gaming comes back now and just entirely changes the OG that you're aware of and changes colours a little bit. Oh, we've gone for black and green instead of white and green now because blah blah blah. And yeah, we've decided to go away from the OG and have the full name in there. It just wouldn't go down well.
Well, of course, and if they imagine they got rid of Green Wall or something like that. Like, these are things that are very central to the brand itself. Just like in many ways the crest or sigil or whatever that is for EG was, and when that initially was not there, people were asking questions and certainly was a little bit confusing. I mean, North is another example off the top of my head where when they rebranded and they had that little toothless guy,
dragon with like an overbite or something, or an underbite. I can't remember which one it is, but yeah, that was a weird one. And then I think the biggest offense they caused there was when like a player like departed the roster. They did like some like Viking Valhalla send off where it looked like they died. Yeah, and there's no context there. It's like, wait, as fucking I can't remember which CS player it was, but it's like, wait, has he died?
I think it was their coach or something, and he had a tweet. I'm not actually dead. Like,
if you have to say that after your previous organization has announced your departure, fuck me, imagine that. So, and they've done it since. I think they did it quite recently again, actually. Maybe for like, was it Kirby when he went to FaZe or something?
It could have been, yeah. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's just like shit in hell. Like, something's severely wrong here. I like the kind of approach you're going for, like keeping everything consistent. But don't use something associated with death, Yeah, and that logo is still absolutely dire as well. I will
of course,
say, in my humble opinion.
I'm amazed they have not changed it despite everything that's come out. Instead, they had like some weird Twitter skit where they had the logo itself animated and like reading mean comments with a lisp or something. It's like, I guess you're trying to play into it, but at this point, I don't know if it's salvageable. So.
No, if you spend like 50k or something, imagine spending like 50k to change that shit as well. You're not going to just go, okay, we need to spend another 50k now for something people may not like again, unless we just go back to what it was before. And we can't do that because then we'll look stupid. We need to show that we're in charge. And then you just like, fuck it, we'll just stick with how it is. And some people take it in good jest, and some people ignore it, I guess. Like Hellraisers, I think they've done some kind of humorous things around it. And as you say, the North video as well, like a lispy dragon. Is it a dragon?
It's supposed to be, I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay. So. See, I don't even know. That's worrying if you can't even tell what you're supposed to be.
Well, one of the other things that this reminds me of, generally speaking, is like just the way that orgs will try to leverage whatever they've got with their new art or something like that. I mean, you just said if they spend 50K or anything, any decent amount of money, they're not going to want to just flush that down the drain. But at the same time, you'd think, tying back to our older conversation about who's wearing what hats and, is somebody really fully invested in a certain kind of job, as you might have to be to avoid issues like what we're talking about. It almost belies a certain like lack of full research or lack of like, maybe they just got a bum deal with whoever they were working with. But if it's such a trend within esports, you have to wonder if, there's some people out there who maybe are in out of their depth as designers for designing a logo and a whole brand refresh for a giant org. Maybe some of the designer firms out there, the people who are staffing them are not experienced enough, but there's not enough due diligence on the side of the orgs to actually go in there. Mm-hmm. I imagine you could extrapolate this out to general staff hirings or general moves in that sense. Do you have some sort of, for lack of a better term, advice as to, some sort of instructive idea as to how orgs could do a little bit more due diligence, or is it just a question of they
Yes.
have to like hire more people? Like tech startups are, of course, somewhat allegorical to esports orgs, where they hire a bunch of people and eventually they whittle down from there because they've overhired, but they're trying to figure out who's actually competent at the job. Is that what they need to do? What's your take on that?
God, my take is stop hiring gamers and start hiring people who are competent at the roles you're trying to hire. Like, look, at the end of the day, it is important to know the industry, but like, there are people who think they are owed jobs in esports because they love League of Legends. And it's like, I love League of Legends and I've been using Windows Movie Maker for 2 years, so hire me as your video editor. Like, no, it's not how this works. Like, when I was trying to take on more freelance writers for a business publication, the first line of their cover letter would be, I play Dota 2 a lot. And it's like, that's not the important thing here. The important thing is that you're really good at your job. So there's a big debate that goes on every 5-6 months or so, where it's like, one side will be, we need to stop hiring sports people and hire endemic people. And obviously the other side opposes that. And for me, I just want us to hire the best people for the job. Like, look, if I prefer people who are experienced, who can then learn about the culture of esports and if they're surrounded by good people anyway, then they're going to get it. And if not, then you've tried and you probably get something decent out of it anyway. Whereas I don't think hiring like people who are the most passionate but lesser skilled is a good route to take. So while I can't really offer any advice to orgs in terms of like best hiring strategies, I'd say actually speak to someone like Nate at New Level Recruiting, who deals with all those kind of things. He worked at like PUBG North America and Riot Games, and now he's got his own thing there. And I mean, there are a couple of others out there as well. If you hit Marcus partner with us, you can see some on esportsinsider.com, reported by yours truly exclusively. Get the plug-in real quickly and then carry on. You know what I mean? Get people who are like, whose jobs are to hire people, to find the best fit for that role. I think that's great because, as we've said so many times, we've all got a lot on, right, in esports. Like, how the hell are we going to find time to really vet people and make sure we find the right person? And if we're moving so quickly, we're probably not fussed about finding the right person, but just finding someone who'll do. And I mean, I don't think that's a kind of a winning strategy in a lot of cases, unless you are just looking to have a high churn of staff. And if that's the case, I can't say I particularly understand that if you're trying to get out of being a startup. If you want to be a legit company that's going to stay around for years and not just exit in 5 years, like Guild Esports is obviously going to do, then, I think more due diligence is necessary. I'd say, again, like, don't romanticize the gaming aspect of it too much. And also, I think esports is more a tech industry than a sports industry anyway. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter if we hire from sports or what. And the tech industry it spans obviously multiple industries, tech in most industries now. So it's probably easier than ever to actually find competent people. You're just more closed-minded towards those because they may not know esports. Like Monte Cristo is big, and Thorin as well, big on like, look, in the top spots, we really need people who understand esports. I can't like disagree with that really. If they're running the show, then sure, make sure they know both, but also make sure they know like their skill set, and what's needed for that job and the esports competency. But like the people under them, if they're being instructed what to do, you'd rather them just be really good at the job rather than being quite shit but loving FIFA. I just don't care about the game aspect. If I was running a company, starting a company, I would not. In fact, I'd say leave gaming out of your cover letter entirely. I do not give a fuck what game you play. You can play Rayman for me or Hercules on the PS1, the new Spider-Man game, BioShock, whatever. I don't care if you want to play competitively. I don't care if you're into Fall Guys now. I don't care if you're Animal Crossing. I don't give a shit. Are you good at your job? Can you code well? Or are you good at social media? You know what I mean? Like that stuff's way more important. And I've been kind of trying to preach that to people behind the scenes for a while, and it's not really gotten too far. And it makes sense because, I mean, who am I? I'm just a content pleb, right?
Well, sooner or later, people will be asking, who is this guy? Because all your content's going to be on the front page and all that stuff.
Well,
you got Dexerto coming up. So
it's going to be everywhere, mate. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's upward trends. So I'm going to ask you an even harder question than the last one. This time, maybe a question that has no answer. Maybe the question has a very obvious answer. We'll see what you think. Is esports a bubble?
A bubble in the sense that if the Overwatch League fails, for example, we're all fucked. We're in a volatile state, I just want to make sure I get the definition very clear here
Right.
first. I don't think we are reliant on any one thing in esports. I think esports is actually bounded together unfairly now. Like in sports, like you'd never really say I'm a sports fan. You say I'm a football fan or a cricket fan or a rugby fan, right? We've got League of Legends fans, and I don't think it's a super high crossover between League of Legends fans and CSGO fans. I think there's a little crossover between FIFA fans and Dota fans, right? And I think we band them together so much. Like, look, if the Overwatch League fails, well, I say when the Overwatch League fails, in my humble opinion, it's gonna signal badly outside. I almost did like a phase up by accident. Then
You already signed that deal as a brand ambassador, huh?
Not until the 19th it goes live, so I can't actually speak about it yet. No, of course not. No. Look, I think it signals something bad to the people outside of the industry because it's a lot of sports ownership, right? And that's the Overwatch League is the highest, or like the most prominent example of investment in the industry in a sense. And as if that does go to shit, when that goes to shit, esports as a whole is going to be tarnished in the sense that look, it's going to be a bad investment for them for however long they're going to say, like 5 years. Don't get involved. We need to wait longer for it to grow. And I mean, we'll still be fine because the people who actually understand esports and not just see things at the Overwatch League level will still invest. And I mean, if the Overwatch League does fail, like that's maybe going to affect COD a bit, maybe affect the COD League a bit, but like I don't see how that affects any other title. In fact, it probably bolsters other titles because these esports fans may be looking for a new game to get into. And I mean, Overwatch is pretty fucking boring anyway, so it's not a title that's close to it, really. I'd say, but you know, I'd say we're not in a bubble. I'd say we're in a heightened state of hype, especially outwardly. The people who look into esports believe a stupid amount of hype, and all the Newzoo numbers, which are bullshit for the most part. All these reports that come out that say we're bigger than the Super Bowl, or I think actually Guild Esports is IPO details said like it's bigger than like the French Open and like some of these huge sporting events, and we don't even use the same metrics to measure these things. So the people who believe that kind of, I don't care about their opinion anyway. But no, I don't think it will damage the industry if Valve said, look, no more Dota 2, no more CSGO. I don't think like esports would be fucked. I think there'd be a period of rebuilding, perhaps in certain areas for orgs who were like predicated on those particular titles. But esports will be fine. It's small and big at the same time. It's probably smaller in the areas people think is big, and bigger in the areas that people think is small and underdeveloped. So I think we'll be fine. But I hope we don't find out anyway. Realistically, I hope we don't have to find out whether we are a bubble and things go really well and it grows to the level everyone predicts, as opposed to having a huge setback. Which then just creates the I hate this narrative so much where people will say, in 10 years, esports will be the next big thing. And then in 2 years' time, the same thing is said. In 10 years, like, wait, no, it's supposed to be 8 years. Like, where's this arbitrary date we're putting on it? Why are we doing that? You know, and I don't want it to be, in 15 years, in 20 years. I want it to actually go the way it's supposed to. And I think like a couple of high-level failures, such as the Overwatch League and Call of Duty League, if they were to go the way of the dodo, it wouldn't look good, but I don't think it would kill the scene. Very long-winded answer, but I gave you one.
Perfect. That's what we're looking for here. So as a jumping off point there, my take or my opinion, I guess, looking at the landscape as it's changed since the whole pandemic started and everybody's been playing online and there's not really been integrated play for a lot of leagues, a lot of games. I've seen a common excuse from the teams to all the way up to actual leagues or tournament operators or game developers. In the case of the Overwatch League, a lot of the times they will say things like, we were very heavily negatively impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. We can't, do the same business operations that we can do. Obviously, one of the initial narratives when the lockdown started were that video games are the literally only things that we can even look at now. So, of course, we're going to see a rise and everybody's taking it more seriously. It was spun in a positive manner. But as time has gone on, people have fallen back on a more negative outlook, saying using it essentially as a way to excuse poor returns of investment or poor viewership numbers in some cases. I mean, obviously, it makes no sense for the Overwatch League to use that as an example, because look at everything else that we've seen in Counter-Strike and League of Legends, where people are watching more than ever, and there's been growth there that would even be, for the people who were bigging it up, they would say it was uncharacteristic growth, generally speaking. So the question then is whether or not I think we can all say that there was initially a negative impact with the coronavirus, the fact that people immediately had to change everything rapidly. And we were thankful that individual games, generally speaking, were not these really lofty battleships that had to take forever to turn. We could pivot very quickly, and be able to move things online in an area where, in some cases, there was already online play, or there was online play very recently, like in the last couple of years in Counter-Strike. So people weren't completely foreign to it. People knew how to set up leagues and broadcasts and stuff to capitalize on it. And even if it took some time to polish off all of the rough edges, like we saw it over at the first Flashpoint, where people were like suddenly pivoting to a new studio and they had to get everything set up. After the first couple of weeks, things tended to be fine. So the question then is, like, considering the fact that we have generally been able to adapt as an industry broadly, has the coronavirus really been that big of an impact? Is it a valid excuse for some of these teams who are and some of these game developers and tournament organizers that are saying that, their plans have been shot because of this? I expect the answer is relatively nuanced, but what's your take generally on how the coronavirus has impacted the esports scene?
I think it's been an accelerant for both the good and bad parts, perhaps. So the people that can't set up good revenue streams and varied revenue streams now and relying purely on sponsorships, that's probably going to fail anyway if you can't go further than that. And the titles that were doing well and the events that were poised to have good viewership, there's probably been more eyes on that. So I think the good aspects have been accelerated. Like the viewership has been decent for a lot of esports titles for a while, and it's given a boost there. I think it accelerated the position sim racing was going to be in, but actually perhaps too far, and that's now retracted. And that was just because of the momentary involvement of those that are actually in the real life version of the esport, right, and of the simulated sport or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. As you say, it's very nuanced. I think you'd have to go by on a case by case basis and say, look, have teams been affected? Yes, but they don't really get that much prize pool anyway. And I mean, what do they actually earn from events? Okay, like how will their merch sales been? Have the fans been impacted economically, so they can't afford the merch as much? So how have things been affected there? But I'd say on a general scale, I think, look, I hated it at first when everyone said coronavirus has been fucking great for esports. Like, this has been absolutely amazing because of the viewership. I'm like, okay, let's speak to all of the events freelancers who have no jobs now. All the production people, all the admins, all those, the ops behind the scenes. Like, let's see what they're doing now. Okay, the players have to just play in their homes all the time now. They probably actually need a break a lot of the time, especially in like CSGO. So they probably appreciated that. But also, these online games and online series just feel inconsequential to me. It doesn't really feel like anything. And I mean, the games are legit. That this is what we have to go with now, so we can't discount them. But also, I don't know if they don't have the same pedigree as being in Katowice, where 17,000 people watching. I mean, half of them are probably giving away tickets, but nonetheless, 17,000 people watching, so they get a nice photo for the next year. But yeah, I'd say there's good and bad elements to it, but what it's done in most elements is either kind of blown things up or sped it along, and both positively and negatively. And I hope events are back soon, because obviously events are like the lifeblood of the scene in a sense, so like of the tournaments and such. Like, there's no esports if there's no games going on. I hope that comes back soon for the fans, because then they've actually the first LAN for CSGO, for example, is gonna be fucking huge, right? I think we'll see some impressive viewership numbers there, but also the staff that work it, because I can't say it's been a really overwhelmingly positive thing when there's so many people out of work right now, and so many people not even knowing when they can get back to work. And there's been some good pivots, which is great. Esports is quite robust, where we had to learn to do things online before we took them offline. So thankfully, we already have those kind of solutions there. It's not always been completely plain sailing, and things change and demands change. So Like you have to adapt and learn as you go along. Like the LCS did pretty shit, but the LEC did great, and they're both riot, right? So it depends on the teams working there. Yeah, I don't know. And things, I don't even know when this shit's going to end. No one knows when this shit's going to end, and we don't know how it's going to change things going forward and keep affecting things. So I also feel it's kind of premature to really give an overall judgment, because I thought we'd see more consolidation among teams, among organizations. I thought the tier 3 kind of orgs, if you think like Ghost Gaming, those kind of organizations that actually got sold off. But nonetheless, I thought they'd consolidate with the reciprocities, which is now folded. Instead of seeing the sales and such, I thought the combined forces, and that would actually strengthen esports. Like, okay, let's consolidate this talent. You're not making enough money separately, but together, maybe you can. Maybe if you have the right people working there and good teams combined with the organizations, that'd be great. Barely seen any of that. And maybe that's just me just thinking naively or wrong. But I think there's more to come because, yeah, organizations are not yet at the point where they're profitable. And the ones that are profitable aren't profitable off of the esports side. They're profitable off of the streaming side, right? And then that opens up a wider debate about whether esports is profitable and what the state of esports, depending on if you conflate like gaming casually and streaming and influencers and content creators in with esports. I'm a purist, so I don't, which then paints a much bleaker picture of esports than somebody who thinks, oh, they can all coexist. Well, and all be part of the same kind of umbrella and all be regarded the same thing. So very roundabout answer there. I apologize. It's a very, very hard one to kind of process and give a definitive answer on, to be honest with you. I went into it confident and then kind of unraveled my own logic in my head.
Well, we can't even say we're Monday morning quarterbacking here because of the fact that it's not over. So we've for sure it's a tough question. So but I appreciate the long answer for sure.
And I appreciate the tough questions.
Of course. So I got a little bit of a layup here for you anyway, because now that we've gone through the tough ones, I did promise before we started that this wouldn't be a show that was really focused on your personal involvement and all of that stuff. But I do have to ask, just for the sake of it, what was the reason why you decided to go with Dexerto? Was there a particular reason that compelled you? Is it more of what we were talking about with regards to the fact that it's an opportunity for you to cast a wider net and reach more audience, get more people potentially interested in the business content? You had some tweets before the announcement that presumably that was already in discussion, but you had mentioned that things like there's a huge vacancy within fans' attention to the actual esports side, the business side of esports, and that with content would come the eyeballs necessary. So, what can you say a few words about why you decided to partner up with Dexerto and what you think the outcome of that will be going forward?
Yeah, I'd say about a year ago, Mike Kent, who's a co-founder, I think he might be like the head of content there, but he's a co-founder, co-owner of Dexerto. He said, "Look, we're interested in the business side. If we do decide to kind of build a business content vertical there, would you be interested in a chat?" And I was really into what I was doing at ESI at the time, so I said, "Look, I'll entertain a chat, but I don't think I'll leave ESI. Like, it would take a lot. It'll take a shit ton for me to ever exit ESI, because I'm very loyal to the brand. Even though I'm leaving now, I'm actually loyal to the brand still. I had to like rip off the plaster to make this happen, and it's a real big departure from my comfort zone to do it, because since I've been in esports working, it's been with ESI, right? So it's I almost question myself outside of ESI how I'll be. But so being completely transparent, I was ready for a change in early August. I think like the 12th of August. And on that day, I said, look, I might start seeing what else is out there. And I got a message from Mike. I hadn't told anyone at this point. I got a message from Mike, and we ended up having a call. And look, he said, look, we're interested. We'd want to start this with you. And I wasn't ready to do it. And so I said no. I spoke to ESI about it and explained some of the reasons as to why I felt like I needed a change. I'm a very honest guy, so I'll go through this, but I won't make it super long. And basically, over the course of the next month, I thought about it a lot. And the reason I was staying at ESI was the loyalty, not really because I was really into what we were doing. So a month later, September 12th, I think it was, I said, Mike, can we have another call? We had another call, and we agree on the potential there. We agree on something needs to be done in terms of blowing that shit up, and it will actually benefit ESI and Observer if I manage to pull this off, because they'll be more interested in business content. They'll just be more interested in mine first, and then go to them afterwards, right? And we agreed on things, and I just said yes then and there. So the actual decision to join Dexerto, it just seemed like a natural one. I didn't shop around going, Observer, would you want to do something? Invent Global, would you want to do something? ESPN, is there a chance I can get? Nothing like that. It was just kind of happenstance, and they're UK, I'm UK. They're the biggest publication in esports. They're actually independent and they're sustainable and profitable. That's very rare in online media altogether. So, like, Dexerto's a unicorn, right? And you can say whatever you want about the kind of content strategy it has. The low hanging fruit pays for the investigative and the really good pieces. I think that's clever, and I think also the low hanging fruit is probably necessary for a certain audience anyway. So I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. And yeah, it happened in 24 hours, and I had to just do it. Like I called Sam, who's my boss, and at ESI, like love the guy to death, but I just said, look, mate, it's the hardest thing I've done in a long time. I'm going, and that was it, and accepted the offer from Dexerto straight away. And the thing is, I've got like a month waiting period, like notice period before I start. But so I knew from like early mid September that this shit was happening. So I've just been thinking through that a lot, and hence the tweets. But yeah, it wasn't like a massive like plan in my head. I was like, look, I'm going to start at ESI, then I'm going to graduate and go to Dexerto, the biggest platform, and then I'm going to be unstoppable. It just happened that way, and I hadn't considered anywhere else. I hadn't spoken to anyone else about a potential gig. If it didn't work out with Dexerto, I'd more than likely still be at ESI for a few more years yet, to be honest with you, but trying to make changes from the inside there with less resources, less people on board, and a couple of other things as well. So yeah, that's basically it. It just kind of happened, luckily for me. I don't know if I'm just that big of a deal now, or I just got lucky. I assume the latter.
Well, like you say at the beginning, you sort of fell into it where you looked up some CSGO news, you found Esports Insider, you applied, here you are. Now a couple of years later, suddenly
It's
you
just
got people knocking down the
lucky
door.
ride the entire time. Just like in life, you think everyone's got shit figured out, but everyone's just winging it, right? That's also been my esports career. That's leaked into my esports career. It's just I started off as a freelancer, then got offered a job. I was like, yeah, I'll be the editor of ESI, and then speak with Mike out of nowhere. Yeah, I'll join Dexerto as a business content lead. Why not? But I do think this may be my last job in esports, my last hurrah, and I hope it's a long one. I hope it lasts a long time, but I do think this will be my last one before I move on to something else. And that's the first time I've said that to anyone as well.
At the risk of probing too deep here, do you have a sort of vision for where you would be going after this, or is that some more things that you're just going to fall into when the opportunity arises?
I hope if I could just fall into whatever's next, that'd be great. But I think it would be a massive pivot for me. Look, I'm really interested in. This is not relevant to esports at all, but I'm really interested in like the fitness and performance, health and wellness side of stuff. In the past 10 months, I've really gotten into it. Like lost a shit ton of weight, and now I really enjoy that stuff. And it's a really emerging sector. If you see what Apple and Peloton and Strava is doing, all of the different companies in the health and performance and fitness space, that's really interesting. And I think there's maybe an opportunity there. I think in maybe 3-4 years, that'll be fucking huge. And there may be some opportunities. I don't know exactly what I do, maybe some content, some marketing. And then I'm kind of dedicating my 20s to working for other people. And then 30s, I'm going to be on some ownership shit. That's the plan. So learn as much as I can. I've got 5 more years to learn as much as I can. And then, yeah, I want to make a go at doing my own thing, whatever that is. I don't have a clue yet. I have to imagine it'll involve content because that's kind of been my life for the past like 5 years now. But apart from that, I can't give like some detailed roadmap. But also, I hope to not just fall into something really. I'd like to be a bit more calculated at some point in my life, to be honest, man.
Well, like you said, we're all winging it, so who knows what'll happen.
Right? Yeah.
As we're approaching the end of the interview, I wanted to extend the floor to you. Any final words or thoughts you want to leave us with? Anything you want to shout out?
Oh God, well. To be honest with you, I want to thank you for reaching out. It never goes amiss when someone thinks it's worthwhile speaking to me, getting my opinions on things, and even if it's just reaching out to see how I'm doing, that I really appreciate that stuff. So when it's like, oh, please, will you, like come speak on my platform and some, like, that's cool as shit. And I mean, I still don't feel qualified to be doing that. So thank you for that. In terms of anything else, I guess if you're interested in the business side of esports with a bit of performance side, I think there'll be some content from me on the performance of esports there, because that's another untapped market, like massively as well. Then you can follow me on Twitter at @Fitch. I seem really dry on Twitter. I take the piss a lot though, so it's actually a lot of sarcastic tweets, but people think I'm just crazy. But yeah, I'm going to be most of my tweets will be about the business side of stuff. And from October 19th, I don't know if it'll go out on the 19th, maybe 20th, depends on what I can make happen. But I'd say probably some big reports coming my way, because I'm finally going to be out of the shadows, I guess, as the editor, and back into the trenches, as you can say, I guess. So I expect to be firmly competing with Jacob Wolf and Kevin Hitt and showing them how it's done. So I've got this coin here, and next year I'll have the trophy here and another coin. That's what they can expect in the next year. So if you want to follow that journey, then you can follow me on Twitter at @BidenFitch. And thank you again for having me.
Of course.